So, Isabel, thanks for the opportunity to talk about your book.
Thanks for having me.
I'm really interested to get a notion of how you came with the idea about writing this book and just the journey of doing that. Like many people think about putting their experience on paper and they go and say, I'm going to write a book, but very few actually take the time to do it. Can you talk me a little bit about that process?
Of course. It wasn't meant to be a book when I started. It actually came from my own, there was an intersection between my own experience of work and the experiences that I was dealing with through my clients, their employees, the training I was running, their management teams. And in a way we were saying the same things but from our own perspectives. They were saying, how do we make work better? How do we get our staff to be more engaged with the things that we want them to do? And I was also at a stage in my career where I was thinking, how can I be more engaged? Because there's something about what I do, the solutions that I come up with clients, that's missing a piece. So I went on a bit of a journey to investigate what I thought that missing piece was. And I'd come from a background that had of parents who'd come as migrants, who'd set up their own business because they, being non-English speakers or non-native English speakers, would never have had a job in the years when they'd come. My mother would have, if she hadn't have started her own business, she might have been a factory worker or a cleaner or something. So they had always embedded this idea that you can make your work your work. You just have to create the environment for it. And I felt that was what was missing. Mm-hmm. People, more than anything, I heard people say to me, I feel stuck. I feel like I could do more, but I don't know where and I don't know how and I'm too afraid to leave. And so hearing their experiences, echoing my experiences, meant it was time to look into it. So I started a research assignment, a self-imposed assignment, and I said, I've got 6 weeks. And I'm going to see if I can unravel this idea of what it means to do work that you find meaningful, fulfilling. And I came across the issue that work was changing. And this was 2007. The GFC had just hit. The smartphone had just been released. We were experiencing this technology that we'd never known before. Everyone had the internet, and now we had things called apps. And what I realised was that there was more to work than most people were experiencing, and it wasn't easy to access this part of work that people want, this feeling of meaning, this feeling of purpose, because most of the time work has been defined for you. Someone says, I want you to do these tasks, and then you have to try to find something that appeals to you within those tasks. And at the same time, we had this technology that we'd never seen before, and that was changing work. Mm-hmm. So 6 weeks turned into 6 months, turned into 6 years, turned into a massive material that only started to make sense recently. And when I felt like things had started to make sense, AI was coming in, we have this drive from millennials to do work that has purpose. We have companies realizing that they need to be transparent. And when all these things started happening in the last 2 years, that's when I thought, I think I've got a book. So
Fantastic.
I spent 2 years in trying to find the relevant threads out of all this research.
Great. And Isabel, obviously you have a background in big consulting companies and working for corporations.
Yes.
And you have experienced firsthand what it means to be engaged on a day-to-day job with a very clear position description.
Yes.
But obviously you have taken a turn and been working for yourself. Can you talk about your personal experience about finding fulfillment in your career?
Yes, one of the revelations that I found for myself through the process of writing is that what makes things fulfilling, sometimes you think it's one thing and it turns out that it's not. At the moment you would say, most people would say, I think I'll find work fulfilling if I can do what I'm passionate about. Mm-hmm. That's the theme that overrides these days. And what I found is that you actually have to do things that you're not passionate about, that you don't know, that you don't understand, that you don't learn. And that's how you end up finding this meaning in work, because you discover. So to find this idea of great work, you have to have this sense of discovery. You have to have this sense of progress and learning. And you have to have this sense of control. Because let's say, I was to say, I'm passionate about singing. I want to be a great singer. There are so many elements of that you just cannot control. So you could go and practice and rehearse all day, every day, and audition as much as you like. You may not find that fulfilling at all. In fact, it probably turns something you love into something that you actually don't like anymore, because you're missing those elements, that discovery, that learning, that feeling of control, that feeling of achievement.
So it's part of what you're suggesting is engage and get started, and as you get in the journey, you will find what you're passionate about?
That's part of it. That's a very big part of it, because what makes us the people we are is an untapped, it's an unknown. You don't know what your full person is. Most people go through their lives never having tested most of the things that might be, because life journeys are what they are. You might find a job that you don't like a lot, but you love the person that you work for, so you do it and you'll develop differently.
That's great. That's great.
Yeah, so I believe that's part of what you need to do, is to let yourself be part of that unknown.
Excellent. And as I was reading the brief of your book, one of the things that came to mind was a quote that is, "The future is already here, it's just not evenly distributed." And it seems that in the first part of your book, you talk about how technologies and how the future is here, and the workforce has already changed. Can you talk us a little bit about what you mean by that?
Yes, so when I say the future is here, we're familiar with this idea of the future of work. We talk about it all the time. But the future of work makes us think, or it makes it sound like it's something that's still coming. So, everything is as it is today, and that thing is still to come. And that's actually not the case. The future of work has arrived. It's only who you are that you get to experience it. So if I'm, driving a bus every day, my future of work, I still think it's something going to happen. I'm still thinking about the robot that's going to take over. Whereas other people who are maybe working as freelancers, for example, and they have to do a lot of the things for themselves, and so it's up to them to engage with this future. They are the ones who are probably reaping the benefits before others. In part of the book, in the early part, I talk about this experience or this revelation I had at some point when I post-GFC, when most experts acknowledge that the turn of the century was 10 decades in. So around 2010, we really began to experience what it was to be in a new century. Before that, it was really just a hangover of the last century. And I discovered that some people were really engaged with this idea of being in the future, and some people had no inkling of it. Everything is as it was, as it should be, and nothing has changed. And I couldn't really understand what had happened with that until I found a fairly extensive body or bodies of work that indicated that the GFC created a bit of a dividing line. Those who were hit hard by the GFC and decided, well, I better figure out what I have to do, they went ahead and they became startups. They learned to program. They learned to understand data. They learned to develop adaptive mindsets. And they are the ones that are actually experiencing this future now. And they will change as the future changes and technology changes. There were the other part of the people who were hit by this GFC who said, I don't want to know. I'm just going to keep my head down, and when the crisis is over, I'll just go back to life as it was before. And I've come across many. They're not just, your average workers. A lot of business owners took exactly their mentality. I even had one client say to me, when we were talking about the impact of change, and this is financial service, which is a very hard hit area by technology, and his words were, "This will happen over my dead body," and I remember thinking it's a really troubling mentality, because it will happen. It is happening. If you're not there, you just won't be there.
That's right. So there's something about the gig economy, what you mentioned about people being more entrepreneurial and how the nature of work is really transforming. Do you think big corporations are going to disappear and it's going to just be a gig economy? What's your thought around it? How it's going to work?
That's an interesting question, because some people have suggested that that's exactly what will happen. That I think Thomas Frey, the futurist, is one who suggests that there is no need for a big corporation anymore, because everything is happening at such fragmented levels, and the capacity to connect millions of small parts, small teams, global teams, virtual teams, pieces of data, pieces of technology, it is so powerful that the overhead of running a corporation is actually going to drag on the success of any company that becomes too big. That you actually need an overhead of management to manage something that you don't even need anymore. So that's been speculated on. I think Peter Drucker, the management guru, suggested that corporations will exist solely of the executive level, the people who manage the culture, the strategy, and the essence of the organisation. So I guess your C-suite, for want of a better word. Everything else will be outsourced. So, and I also saw recently, someone said that there will only be two people left in organisations: the owner and the chief technology officer. That's it. Everything else will be a service.
Mm-hmm.
So will the corporation die? I don't think so, not in a hurry, but they definitely will be reinvented.
Yeah, and there's a flavor of this George Orwell in your book with dystopia. What's the approach that you take about that concept, and how do you use it in your book?
Okay, so this idea of the dark future of work where we're being controlled by robots and so on. I actually probably have a different take to a lot of people who see that dystopian future. I think we actually are coming out of a dystopian past, because we were mechanized for for 2 centuries. Work has been something that's been devised around machines. You go back to the first industrial revolution. Steam engine came in, and everyone had to learn to pull levers, because that's how the machines produced the goods that they did. Then you move on a little bit further, and we had Frederick Winslow Taylor, who devised the scientific management principles, where everything is standardized to the point where you don't have to do anything except your part. So I think that is a dark past that we've come from, and the future is actually a lot more optimistic. So I don't think robots are coming for our jobs. What robots do is one thing. They do that one thing very well. So if that one thing is to, say you're in the medical profession and it's to try to diagnose an illness, that one thing might be to compare your symptoms with millions of other studies and research and cases around the world. That's the only thing it can do. It can't reassure the patient. It can't ask the patient questions based on emotion. It can't hold the patient's hand. All the things that people prefer to do, but we've actually been trained not to do it. And if you think about the way we've been managed over the years, it's always, don't be distracted, get your work done. At school, stop talking, I'm going to separate you two. So all the things that we were taught or conditioned not to do, I think that's dark. And the future, where we're actually going to be told, engage, relate, be social, be emotional, be creative, be innovative, be collaborative. I see that as a great way to work.
Yeah. So in your book, you also talk about this relationship between the industrial master and the uneducated, and how they use the inability of people to be educated to keep them under control. Today we see all the gig economy and entrepreneurs in San Francisco really imposing really stressful days in their own lives, and really strong work ethic, to put it in a simple way, but they self-impose this. Have you seen that there's a transition between someone else imposing it in ourselves to ourselves imposing it in us?
It is difficult, because we are schooled with this idea that, and it's all very popularized by media, that the person who puts themselves under these extreme pressures and this extreme workload, they're the ones who make it. The evidence is that we don't know that that's why they made it. I mean, that's, it's always very easy to retrospectively fit the story to suit the end that you want it to have. But then you have, Tim Ferriss's 4-hour work week that says exactly the opposite. Do less to achieve more. So I think there's a romanticism about having these entrepreneurs who work these enormous hours and come out somehow with these massive results. Is that what people should be doing to get ahead in the new world? I don't think so. I don't think you can't quantify what it takes to to build the relationships and to build the smarts that you need to work in a digital world.
Yep.
You can't do more of it. It's not a quantity issue.
So obviously your book is called the Michelangelo Project.
Yes. And
you talk about how you use Michelangelo narrative to tell the story.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about what that means?
Yes. The name came about because when I was looking, so this is when I was still doing my research before I realised I was going to write a book. One of the themes that came up regularly was how the systems that we were using in the past tended to always favour the type of person or certain type of person. If you sat at the fringes of those types, you were less likely to succeed. So if you're a migrant, if you have a disability, if you're an older worker, you're a younger worker, all these factors that add as disadvantages. And that was a constant theme, that we were basically undermining huge parts of our environment, huge parts of our society, and losing the inherent value that we could bring because we had these systems that would choose one person for no real good reason over another. And that came about as a story that I used as a narrative about Michelangelo, who completely turned everything around. He refused to follow the norms. He refused to be classified. He hated being called a painter or a sculptor or an artist because he felt that would limit him. And this idea that, we've got a system that limits people, and we have one of the greatest talents, one of the greatest artistic talents in history who bucked against that trend. So it became this project of, how do we find the value in people and override the systems that said that, you should fit into these boxes.
Yeah. You use the concept from Michelangelo about self-trust.
Yes.
What that concept means in this new environment.
Well, there is a lot of faith that you have to have that the world that's coming is going to be fine for you, that you're going to make it. So we don't know what tomorrow is going to look like. Who could have guessed that we would have a smartphone? Who could have guessed that we would have, all the things that we have now? And technology will change more rapidly. So what we do today could be very different tomorrow. We can't go to school and say, I'm going to study law because I've been told that's a safe career. And when all the evidence points to the fact that law won't be a safe career because it's very algorithmic, there are very black and white pieces that you have to follow. So if that's not going to be the world, we can study law or study medicine or study or accounting, all these supposedly safe jobs, and you'll be fine for the rest of your life. If that's not the case, then where do you get that sense of security from? And it can only come from yourself. So the story of Michelangelo is that his patrons were the very powerful de Medici family, and they gave him, and they were not only the richest family in Italy, they were also part of the papacy. So they had all the power, and if he didn't have such powerful patrons, he would have no work. And one of his patrons ended up dying, and he fell into this very black hole of despair, saying, I had all my faith put in this person, so what am I going to do now that he's dead? My livelihood, my future is died with him. And then he brushed himself off and said, actually, no, I need to now learn how to have faith in myself. I need to develop the skills so that I'm the one I can trust. So I believe that we learn to have self-doubt. It comes over time when we think, we're not that good anymore. So if we can learn self-doubt, why can't we learn self-belief? Mm-hmm. And self-belief comes from this ability to know that you can create your own successes as long as you have all the things around you to do so, including others to help you, including the right set of skills, including the right mindset.
That's great. So, as it happened, I wrote my thesis on social capital in 2001. And you talk about social capital as one of the big things that will be required to be successful or to change the way we work today. Can you explain how you apply this concept in your book and in your work as well?
Yes, so social capital is the value generating ability that comes out of everything social, basically relationships and the emotions that go into relationships. It's the transfer of emotions, of reciprocity, of give and take. And if you look at a social media influencer, for example, people who can earn quite a lot of money, they don't produce anything. They use their own social capital, their ability to create something that people find interesting, and they transact that to create value. So we didn't make anything. So it's very different from the past where we had physical capital, mm-hmm. machines churning out bits and pieces. Then we had knowledge capital, where I used my intellect to help those machines churn out even more bits and pieces. And now suddenly we're bypassing this idea that value comes from bits and pieces, and we're finding that greater value comes from the experiences, from services, from users who interact with each other even though they don't know each other. Whether you're looking at platforms like Uber or Airbnb, sure, there's some physical component to it, but the majority of the value comes from the fact that it's connected millions of people together to do certain things. So that's where I see social capital coming from. Mm-hmm. And why it's so important now is because as the more organisations need to cater for individuals who, because of their smartphones, can demand exactly what they want, when they want, and how they want. If they don't find it here, they'll tap away and they'll find it elsewhere. So if you don't have the ability to engage with the people and to keep them connected to you, and to be willing to transact with you no matter what it is you actually produce, then you don't really have anything. Because if I want to buy this chair, I can buy it not only anywhere in my suburb now or anywhere in my state, but now anywhere in the world I can get it made. I can find substitutes. I won't use my chair, I'll get onto a sharing economy and I'll use your chair. So that means that suddenly we have to think about what people see in the world around them, and if we're not connected with those people and their thoughts and feelings, we don't have a business.
So obviously the share economy is taking off. Long time ago already took off, and probably we can start with the history of that. But do you think everything will become a share economy?
I don't think so, because there are sharing is based, what you're willing to share is based on your attitude, what you value. I mean, when we grew up, we were told not to let strangers in our house, not to get into the car with strangers, and now suddenly we've got these billion-dollar companies made exactly out of those two things. We changed our minds because the GFC forced us to find alternative sources of income out of assets we already had in our possession. So that suddenly changed. If it wasn't for that, we probably still wouldn't be letting people into our houses or into our cars. There is a sharing economy now for apparel. Would you want to share the clothes you wear? Go to this shared wardrobe, pick out what you want, and then put it back. There has to be a reason. Now, the people who are motivated to do that probably have environmental concerns, might be a big driver, or financial concerns. When you can break down some of those concerns enough, then people will share. But maybe I don't know, where will the line be? I'm not sure. Maybe we'll be sharing family members soon. You know, you can have my grandmother some of the time, and I'll have her some of the time.
So do you think the sharing economy was only started due to the economical need of people, and they find assets that they were not producing, and if we hadn't had a crisis, that wouldn't have happened?
I'm pretty sure it was very seminal in the rise of the sharing economy, because if you look at where sharing first started, or where the real growth came from, it was vehicles, it was houses, and it was time. So Airtasker and TaskRabbit and so on. And they were the things that, for a lot of people who were under financial pressure, they were the only things that they had that they could easily share. And so, I do believe that was very much part of the rise that we see. If it wasn't for that, I don't know, who knows?
We keep hearing this really scary notion that robots are going to take our jobs. And we briefly touched on that before. Yeah. What's your perspective about that?
Robots aren't taking jobs, they're taking tasks. They're taking the tasks that make sense for a person not to do. So repetitive tasks, dangerous tasks, black and white, algorithmic, logical tasks, heavy workload, heavy computing tasks, boring tasks. They're the tasks that they're designed for, and they're the tasks that make sense financially for organisations to invest in. If that's all that you do, then yes, your job will probably disappear. Otherwise, no. The robots aren't here for jobs, they're here for tasks. And for someone who's worried about their job, they need to start breaking down the tasks that they do and looking for the social components that they can use to create their own new future.
You mentioned the adaptive and inclusive practices in your book, and obviously when you look at organizations, they have changed the way that they manage people. It's more team-based, it's all about engagement, it's all about culture. How do you approach this situation in the gig economy, where everyone is in their own place, and how do you think this playing out in the future?
The short answer is, who knows? We don't, and that's because we don't know how the people who own the technology, how they're coding their software. I mean, if they try hard to hide the fact that they are favouring certain groups over others, and you see Facebook as being one platform that has done a poor job of treating everyone equitably. YouTube is the same. They can easily make it worse, and we probably wouldn't know. If they change the way we see certain news, for example, or they change the people that we see regularly, or the way certain characteristics are featured, and we over time get a sense of things being good or bad, or we don't see them at all because it doesn't suit them because the advertisers are paying for this to be kept out, then we'll be in a worse situation for sure. But what I have found, which is interesting, is that with the experience I've dealing with different organisations, is there is a very concerted push to increase and improve the level of inclusiveness and diversity around their organisations. And it is partly because when you strip away the mechanical parts like jobs and tasks, and you're only left with the person, you have to deal with the person a little bit more at close quarters. You have to deal with their likes and their dislikes, and the fact that they have family members and they have preferences that don't include employers. So there is a lot of recognition that to get the most out of people, to get the most out of everyone, from gig workers onwards, we have to factor in that we have to include everything about them, including their love of dogs, including people with sensory issues, with language issues, with whatever it might be.
Let's leave the book behind for a little bit, and let's think about how you apply this in work and when you're consulting with your clients. How do you help them to make the digital transition? How do you help them to embrace what's happening in the market and transform their organizations?
The part that I focus on is always around the people that they deal with, the people who make the difference, and that's always their customers and their teams. And more they're becoming the same people, because people feel, staff actually are starting to feel more loyalty to the customers of their employers than their employers themselves, because they build relationships. The first thing that I do is to look for where and how these people fit. So who are your customers is always the first question, came out of a marketing background, and that was always the first question. Who are your customers, and what do they want, and what do you want to do for them? That's different now because things are different. So in retail, it used to be, the customer is the shopper and I want to give them a product. But now customers might not be strictly shoppers anymore. They could be people who engage with their online content, who read their blogs, who watch their videos, who participate in their social media. They haven't bought anything. So those people become very important. And I've tried to help organisations recognise that there is now this community, this ecosystem of people. So that's the first thing. The second thing is to look at how they have to adapt the way they operate to maximise the value of these relationships. And that's always harder than you think it is, because so many processes are designed, in the past were designed around sequential. You were a prospect, and then you were a qualified prospect, and then you were a customer, and so on. And of course that doesn't happen anymore, because you've got this approach where people can be users but not customers, or customers and not users, and so on. A big part of the work that I do comes from coaching people through their interactions. So what I found has been a very strong predictor of success of digital transitions is the conversations that go on within the organisation. So simply by understanding the quality and nature of conversations, you can easily find the areas that you have to change. You can see if your team have conversations that are very, say cost focused, or very task focused, and you want them to become more creative and collaboratively. Of course, you can pull out the elements that make them, that focus their minds in the wrong areas, and retrain them to think and understand the way you want them to work. And the other part, so there's probably three parts to what I do, is understanding the organisation as a whole, understanding the interactions with the people, so user to employee to manager, team, and so on. And the third part is in the pool of talent that people have. Because of the way work is changing, these kind of static jobs probably won't exist anymore. And the more artificial intelligence takes over how we manage business processes, the more we'll actually find people fitting into jobs in a much more fragmented way. So organisations are actually going to need a very large pool of people who don't necessarily work for them at all the times, but could work for them at any time. And people need to be skilled up enough to be able to exist in these pools and make sure that they're always available for the work at the right time. So I try to work on this idea of talent pipelines, that you're always creating a pipeline for your future needs. So that's upskilling, making sure that people are ready for the changes, and that's where the adaptiveness and the inclusiveness comes from.
So if I'm in my 50s or 55 and I have been doing the same work for 35 years, what advice you will have for me?
Well, if you've been doing the same job for 35 years, there's probably a good bet that you won't be doing it for much longer, because they're the sorts of jobs that are very easily automated. But you've probably got life experience that no one can ever gain from any school or any training. So what my advice to you is to start looking at how that life experience can be utilised in a world that needs more of the heart and more of the head, and less of the hands. I saw a Deloitte study that said there is a skill shortage of customer service of 5.5 million.
Wow.
So that means there are 5.5 roles out there wanting customer service, which is incredible when you think about Australia being a service industry heavy nation. You know, hospitality and retail and professional services and education, I mean, they're all services and they're our biggest industries, and we've got this gap of 5.5 million skill shortages in customer service alone, and 3 million in digital literacy shortages. So if you just put that together, and you're someone who has life skills, you've been doing these things, you've picked up all this inherent innate knowledge, there's room for you, but you have to dig it out. So I would suggest that you would need to find someone who can help you identify and extract from your experience all the things that you have and learn where to reapply them. And probably life looks better for you, this 55-something person, because you have all these things that are hard to get through. A person coming out of school can't suddenly get all the experience and knowledge that you have, tacit knowledge that you have.
So let's take it to the other extreme. My daughter is 7. How do I help her to be prepared for the future?
She will be entering a future that you and I, we have no concept of really. And I know for a lot of young people, it's a very anxiety-ridden time, because they're hearing about the jobs they're going to be studying for that won't exist. So I can probably only talk about what I know and where I've gone. So my daughter at year 10 left high school, not because she wasn't studying well or had any issues or didn't want to go to university or whatever, but I didn't want her to feel as though that she had to find a path, study it, and then everything would hang on that path, and if it didn't, it would be a disaster. And the only way to do that is to actually do it. So she went out into the big wide world. She she went to Swinburne. She was accepted in TAFE. She undertook a certificate course, and now she's doing a diploma course and she works, and she volunteers, and she's just been tapped on the shoulder to do some sporting coaching. So she has had to learn to find a path and to create opportunities out of the things that she has and knows, not rely on a system to get her through the other end. So I'm not suggesting you should tell your daughter not to go to school or not to go to university, but I think we have to be careful about letting young people think that the system will take care of them when we know the system is actually buckling under pressure now.
Anything you would like me to ask that I haven't asked you?
No, you've done a very thorough job, I must say.
Okay.
My name's Isabel Wu. I'm the author of a book called The Michelangelo Project, Making It in the Digital Century Workforce. The book is about to be released in September 2019. I'm a management consultant, coach and trainer, and I focus on areas of people development, organisation development, systems and behaviour.